everyone, this is Laura. She is the author of Unassisted Childbirth, as well as the owner of the website unassistedchildbirth.com. And we are going to be diving deep into some questions with her. And one of my first questions for you is, how do you see everyone's perception of unassisted birth different now than when you wrote the book in 1994?
Well, I think when I wrote it, people didn't know what it was. Even I didn't call it unassisted childbirth. When I had my babies in the 70s and 80s, I didn't know what to call it. To me, it was just having babies the way that felt right for me. And I was more focused on the psychological aspects of being relaxed and calm. And then, by the way, no one else was there. But that was almost secondary to my mental state. If you can get into this peaceful and calm mental state and you're not interfering with yourself, then babies can be born easily and peacefully. And it helps if no one else is around either to interfere. When I actually wrote my book and submitted it to my publisher, I don't know, like maybe 1992 or 93, they titled it Unassisted Childbirth. And I thought, oh, okay, that's what this is. I guess now a lot of people refer to it as free birth, which I eventually found out that Janine Parvati Baker had titled this free birth. I wasn't aware of her when I had my babies, but it took me a very long time before I met anybody that had their babies unassisted. And now with the internet, people from around the world can connect. And of course, now there's my website and many other websites about unassisted childbirth. So I think as people understand that women are doing it successfully, then it's helping people to overcome their fears. And so people are telling their friends. And so it's spreading. It's not so unusual anymore. Of course, this is the way babies were born throughout history, but as far as in our modern culture, it's still unusual. And there's still people that don't know that it exists, that people are intentionally giving birth this way. But our numbers are growing. And as I think, our consciousness is evolving and people are beginning to understand the power of thoughts and feelings, and that we're not these powerless creatures that have to depend on the authorities to save us in every aspect of our lives. As people begin to believe in their own abilities, they're translating it into every area of their life, and birth is one of them. So now there are more people that are doing this. And I think people used to write to me and they were so glad that I had posted pictures of my children on my website, because they were like, oh, they actually lived through this. They survived, And of course, I don't have documentation really of the births. The way now you can go to YouTube and you can see unassisted births. And so I think that's becoming more real to people. The main thing I think is it's the fear is dissipating as more people do it. And so, now it is more commonplace. More people are doing it.
Yes, and it's so lovely, because even when I was watching one of your interviews, it was so hard to see that during that time they were a lot more defensive to the idea of it. And I feel like now if you were to do the interview, people would still be on the fence, but a lot more open to newer ideas.
Right.
Yes. In one of your videos, you said that most people don't really have a knowing or an idea of what birth truly is. Most of what they know comes from media, or it comes from what their moms told them or what their sisters told them about their experiences. So what could you say to moms or to individuals who are a little bit skeptical, and when it comes to the idea that unassisted birth is illegal?
Well, first of all, just research it and you will see that it is not illegal. At least it's not illegal in most places. I think there are a few countries in the world that there may be laws around it. Here, it's not illegal. There are some states where you are required that make midwifery illegal, that having a midwife at a home birth is illegal.
but not
But
on its own.
right, but if you're doing it yourself, it's not. So, and I think that's, it's like sometimes babies are just coming, and certainly there's a lot of unintentional unassisted births, so they can't really say no. If your baby comes out, that's against the law. No one was there. But so some people are, have told me that, oh, in my state it's illegal. No, if you want to bring a midwife in, maybe
Yes.
it's illegal. And that's really too bad, because I believe that women should give birth wherever and with whomever they want. So I've never been an unassisted birth zealot and said, this is the only way you should do it is by yourself. No, I mean, I think it would be wonderful if women could have a midwife if they wanted one. The problem is that midwives, many of them they want to be licensed because they're afraid of going to jail if something goes wrong. If they, but in a sense, they have to give up a lot of their freedoms in order to get that license. They have to agree to do this and this and this. They have to answer to the state. And, who do you answer to? The woman that says, you know what, I think I'm okay. I know my water's been broken for 24 hours, but I feel good and I feel like the birth is progressing. Do you answer to her and you say that's fine? Or do you answer to the state that said, oh, 24 hours, water's broken, transfer to the hospital? So that's where it kind of gets tricky when people say to me, why not just have a midwife? Well, because in most states, they have a set of rules they are required to follow that may not really be in keeping with what I believe a natural birth is, and a woman following her own instincts. You can't put a clock on that.
And it's very true, because in an ideal world, I mean, moms who love unassisted birth, they wouldn't mind having an extra hand to help. But if that extra hand is interfering with them, that's when it becomes like, you know what, I don't even want you there entirely.
Right.
So
Right.
I definitely understand that.
Mhm.
So you're talking about pain-free birth. And some people think like, whoa, how can birth be pain-free? Because we've been taught through media that birth is a painful thing. And you shared a lot about how fear actually causes pain. So could you
Right.
elaborate a bit more on that?
Yeah. So basically, there is a mechanism within you called the fight flight response, and it's there to save your life. So it has to override all our other natural bodily functions. So if you were in, say, years ago, you're out in the wild, you're about to be attacked by a tiger, there has to be something that can give you the energy that you need to fight, or in this case, run from that tiger. So basically what happens is that natural bodily functions shut down, like digestion. You stop digesting your food because your body wants to take all its natural resources and use them to get you out of this dangerous situation. So it stops digesting food, so if you're in a state of stress, you may get a stomach ache because digestion has shut down. If you're about to give a speech and you're nervous, your mouth may get dry because saliva production is the first step in food digestion. Your body's thinking, you don't need to digest food right now. You don't need to speak right now. You need to get out of this situation. So things like your face turns white when you're afraid because your body thinks, oh, blood and oxygen don't need to go to the face. They need to go to the arms and legs so you can fight this danger or run from it. So your body's also thinking, oh, you don't need to give birth right now. You're in a dangerous situation. So blood and oxygen don't go to the uterus, right? So the uterus of a frightened woman in labor, which most women are, is literally white, just like your face would be white if you're afraid. And so it doesn't have the fuel it needs. And so babies get stuck and women have tremendous pain. You deprive a muscle of blood and oxygen, it's going to be problematic. You're going to be in pain. So that's where I believe most of the pain in labor comes from. I think I had some pain in all my labors, but it was minimal because I was relaxed, because I understood that my body had been beautifully designed and that whatever consciousness was there that knew how to take an egg and a sperm and make it into a human being, I trusted that is not some stupid consciousness or just a bunch of chemicals coming together. there's some mind, there's some intelligence behind that. And that intelligence knows how to complete the process. As long as we don't trigger fight flight, as long as we aren't sending messages to our body saying, we're in danger now, we're in danger now, utilize all your resources to run from this. If we can just basically step aside and say, oh, this is not really a function of the conscious mind. That same intelligence is there. That same intelligence will get the baby out. All I need to do is just relax and allow it to work. And so that's what I really worked on in my births was, it was, first looking at it logically, like why should the very thing that ensures the continuation of the race be the worst thing that a woman goes through? It didn't make sense to my rational, critical mind. I wasn't even that spiritually inclined back then, but that didn't make sense to me. It made sense to me that yes, it has been designed. We have to not interfere with it psychologically. So if I can just be relaxed, I think my body will be able to do what it needs to do and get the baby out. Then I started realizing, oh, if a bunch of people are interfering with me, that's going to disrupt the process, just like it would disrupt the process if you're trying to have sex or you're trying to go to the bathroom and there's a bunch of people surrounding you, or they're telling you, this is how long this phase of, okay, you're starting to have sex. Now, let's see, you should be aroused in this amount of time, and you can't, it's an artistic, creative act. That's how I view birth. And when you try to fit it into this little box of what the medical establishment has now labeled normal birth according to them, normal pregnancy is this many weeks, normal labor is this many hours. And so you have not only the inside interference with your fear, you have the outside interference with people poking you, prodding you, testing you, drugging you. All of that then disrupts the process, and then there comes the pain. But I don't believe, it doesn't make sense to me that pain, why should you have pain? It's, why should sex feel good? Partly so that we will procreate, but then birth is the worst thing you ever go through. It didn't make sense to my logical mind. And then when I did give birth and I had some pain, but it was minimal, then I felt like, yeah, that just intuitively felt right to me. Like, no, it's, we just need to give it the right conditions. Just, you're going to sleep. If you have loud noises and bright lights, you're not going to fall asleep. And if you're stressed, you're also not going to fall asleep because you're pumping adrenaline through your body and noradrenaline to keep you awake because you're saying there's a danger. And you wouldn't say, well, sleep has been poorly designed because I'm trying to go to sleep and there's somebody banging on a drum and the lights are all on and I'm not going to sleep. It's been poorly designed. But that's what they've said with birth. And they don't understand. Most people don't understand. You need to pull back and look at, well, what are the conditions surrounding birth? And what are the beliefs surrounding birth? And so that's what I did is I really began to look at it, and and then when I began to understand, I studied tribal birth, and I saw that, there's so many myths about, people say, oh, women and babies were dying, all the time prior to the hospitals coming along. And it's like, no, actually, if you research tribal births in healthy tribal cultures, they weren't dying all the time. They were really very successful. Anthropologists could observe a tribe for years and sometimes never see a death or a complication. So I think for me, understanding, really researching this and getting rid of all these myths that birth is not inherently dangerous and it's not inherently painful, but you do need the right conditions. And that's fearlessness or, confidence in oneself, trust in oneself, not having a bunch of people around you, and then certainly not living in extreme poverty where you're starving to death or you're living in a war-torn country and you're, hearing gunshots. And women in our culture, we can give ourselves that peaceful environment. We can overcome our fear. We can tell the doctors and the midwives, no, thank you. And we can feed ourselves well and have proper housing and clean water. And then we can give birth successfully.
Yes.
With very little pain.
Wow, you touched on so many different things, and it's honestly mind-blowing to me that you started your research so long ago, like 1994. It's amazing that you had so much courage to be different, because even now when I speak about unassisted birth, so much people are shocked or they don't know that it even exists. So for you to be tapping into that knowledge just based off of what you felt was right to you in your own heart is absolutely beautiful. And I just want to give you a round of applause just for that.
Thank you.
It's really, really nice. So you touched on your births, and what's amazing about you is that you had all four unassisted births. And usually moms would have like their first or their two, and maybe they would feel more confident about birth and then go
Right.
assisted. But you went straight in from your first all the way to your fourth. So could you share a little bit more about your four births and what it looked like?
Yeah. So, and in a way, so my first baby was actually born in 1978. So and I came across this stuff, let's see, when was it? Like 1976, when my first husband was reading a book called Childbirth Without Fear by Grantley Dick Reed. He was sort of the man who got the natural childbirth movement started. He was British, and he's the one that really taught me about fight flight. And so, I think I was 18 at the time when I came across that. Let's see. Yeah, I was 18. And my husband was reading this book because he was interested in the evolution of self-consciousness, and he'd come across this book. And I met him the night that I met him. He told me about this book. He's like, this is we were both college students, and he said, here's this fascinating book. And I was up all night listening to him tell me about this. And I thought, wow, I never really had any interest in having babies. I had heard, my mother had told me about the episiotomy, and I was like, oh God, I'm not going to have babies. And then, but I was so fascinated by this. And around that same time, maybe within a year or so, I was also starting to sort of discover spirituality and, oh, there's something beyond the physical. I'd grown up basically an atheist. But I had also grown up with a very medical family. My father was a physician, my mother did medical research, and my sister was a labor and delivery nurse. So I had really, people used to tell me, like, my father was a wonderful man, but people used to tell me, oh my God, your father is like this God, your father is just so wonderful. And in many ways he was, but I didn't have the same feelings towards doctors that I think a lot of people had. Like, I'm like, he's my dad, he's just a man. And I didn't really idolize doctors. I'd also had some traumatic experiences with doctors growing up. And I was not a fan of medicine, modern medicine, even though I know modern medicine is great in many ways. So in some ways, I had a real fear of doctors. So I feel like it was my confidence in myself and my feeling like this just makes sense, coupled with my fear of doctors, that just sort of led me to believe, like, okay, you know what? I think I'll be better off not having them there. And because when I first got pregnant, because then my husband and I ended up getting together eventually, after that first night when I learned about all this, and then when we decided we wanted to have babies, and our first thought was, we'll bring in a midwife. And then we started thinking, we are going to have to teach her about everything we're learning. And she's probably going to think we're a nut for a lot of this. And, and so my husband said, well, why don't we just do it ourselves? And so I thought, okay, that sounds good to me. So I did go in for a pregnancy test. I remember one night when I thought, I woke up from a dream, and in the dream, I was going like this with my hands as if I was creating something in between them. And this blue spark appeared. And I woke up and I said to my husband, I feel like I just created something. It was so powerful. And now if you Google blue spark conception, like that is actually a common phenomena, experiencing a blue spark at conception. I'm not the only one who's felt that. But at the time, it didn't occur to me, I was just like, I feel like I created something. I wrote it down in my dream journal. And a few months later, when I had stopped getting my period and I did go in for a pregnancy test, and they said, okay, this is when you would have conceived. And I went back and looked in my dream journal, and that was the night that I had that dream. And then if you, according to what they say, how long pregnancy should be, my due date should have been August 21st. And that's when I gave birth. Now, I know that a lot of people don't give birth on their due date. And that's one of the things that really can be problematic, because doctors can say, this is when every pregnancy has to be this long. And, but I happened to just give birth on my due date. So, but anyhow, I had a really easy pregnancy. I never went back for prenatal care. Some women that have unassisted births do choose to get prenatal care from a doctor or midwife. It wasn't my choice. I ate well. I ate whatever appealed to me. I got plenty of exercise. I lifted weights. I took lots of walks. I got fresh air. I did throw up one day during my pregnancy. And I thought, well, why? Because I don't think that I question everything that we're told about birth. I thought, okay, I'm not afraid of the birth. Why am I throwing up? And what hit me was that I was afraid of motherhood. And so I told myself, I'm confident I'm going to be a good mother. And I said my belief suggestions, which is what I'm a believer in, affirmations or belief suggestions. And then I never threw up again with any of my other pregnancies. So that was my one day, and I never had any other symptoms. And so I had a very easy pregnancy, and then went into labor. One afternoon, I did read Spiritual Midwifery by Ina May Gaskin, and I read the birth stories. I didn't read all about physiologically what happens. I had a basic understanding. I didn't read about complications. Some people choose to do that. That was not my choice. I just was such a big believer. I was reading the Seth material, which is you create your own reality, the power of thoughts and feelings. So I did some visualization. I do a lot of dream work. I practiced giving birth in dreams. And in the beginning of my pregnancy, I was surrounded by my father and other doctors. I was in pain in these dreams. By the end of my pregnancy, I was dreaming that I was giving birth really easily. And then one afternoon, I started feeling contractions about 3 p.m. I got out my birth stories, my Ina May Gaskin. I reread the birth stories over and over again, because that was what helped me. Mm-hmm. And then basically just let my body work. And then we had some friends that were interested in being there. So we called our friends. We said, baby's coming. And I was actually sitting on the toilet when my water broke. I reached down, I felt his face at my perineum. I got up, walked over to the bed, and I was on my hands and knees on the bed about to turn over when I heard an internal voice say, don't turn over. And a second later, the baby came flying out, and my husband caught him in midair.
Wow.
So that was, it just was pretty quick. And, I didn't time my contractions. I didn't measure dilation. I mean, I think every body is different. Every baby is different. So to say that everybody has to be 10 centimeters, and then, you can't push until you're 10 centimeters. And then once you're 10 centimeters, you have to push. I questioned all of that. And my body gave 3 or 4 voluntary, like semi-involuntary pushes. It's just like when suddenly he was just coming, my body just kind of pushed him out in just a few pushes. Mm-hmm. All my other babies were born in one push. So it doesn't have to be pushing and panting and struggling. It's more move out of the way, let your body work, catch your baby.
Yes.
So that was the first one. You want me to go through all of them, or?
Your second one I'm very interested in, because it was a breech baby.
Right.
And most people consider breech babies like a really scary thing, like the worst case scenario in an unassisted birth.
Right.
So how did you deal with that, with being calm, and what was your strategies throughout the delivery?
Well, I had a dream, and I don't follow every dream. I think some dreams are more symbolic, but I'd had a very powerful dream with that pregnancy, that I was watching a woman giving birth, and she was standing up over a little plastic baby bathtub, and she was catching the baby herself. And I heard a voice in the dream say, tell her to remember not to do too much. And I really got the feeling of what that was, that it wasn't a matter of, like I said, pushing and panting and struggling and trying and figuring this out, that it really, what it means to just, if you can grasp the concept of what it means to do nothing, basically. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to stand for that birth, because I had planned on giving birth on my hands and knees because that had worked so well. But with the first one, but in the dream, I saw this woman standing, and I thought, okay, I'm going to stand over my little plastic baby bathtub. And so when I went into labor with him one morning, my husband and I had sex, which I have since read can be a good thing to have in labor. That gets the hormones flowing. The same hormones that you need when you are having sex are the ones you need when you're giving birth: oxytocin, estrogen. And so we had sex, and then I decided to take a shower, and then I was walking across the room about 2 hours after I felt the first contraction, and suddenly my water broke. Now, after my water broke, didn't feel a thing. I didn't feel any pain. So I had felt some pain before that, but suddenly there's no pain. So I reach in and I can feel my muscles going like this. So I know I'm having contractions, but no pain. And then suddenly a foot pops out. And so, and he's like pointing his toes, like wiggling around, testing the water. And so my 2-year-old standing there, he's like, what's that? And I said, that's the baby's foot. So at this point, my husband says, do you want to go to the hospital? Like, what should we do? Should we call an ambulance? And I said, no, I'm just going to stay calm. And I just said my belief suggestions, that I trusted that I have inner help, that I trusted my body. And then little by little, over the course of a couple minutes, his foot got a little bit lower and lower, and then another foot popped out. And then something just said, the time is right. And I gave one push-pull and just guided him out. Wow. So now 12 years later, when I was writing my book, I read that Michel Audant, who is a French physician who actually volunteered to write the preface to my book, and he's well known in the home birth field, that he says that breech babies can be born vaginally, but 2 key things to keep in mind are to keep the woman in a standing, squat, or upright position and do absolutely nothing to interfere, if at all possible. And that's what I felt like the messages in the dream were to me. Rather than my dreaming I'm having a breech baby, which would have frightened me, I got those messages and that's what I feel like. We have many inner resources, and dreams are one of them, and affirmations are another, and visualization is another, and certainly our rational critical mind, that's another. So it's a matter of really tapping into these natural resources that we've been given. It's not like I rejected the medical community and just said, okay, just me and my ego, I'm doing this all. But no, there's much more to us than we realize. And there is inner help available to us through our dreams, our impulses, our intuition. And as I said, using our rational critical mind too. It's a combination of rational critical mind and intuitive mind. So that was just a fantastic experience. It was 2 hours from start to finish. Wow. And I remember taking him outside, and we were sitting out on the grass, and I was just totally blissed out. And this woman walked by, and she's like, oh, how old is your baby? And I said, well, he was born a couple hours ago. and I told her what happened, and she was like, you changed my life. I'm going to have my babies at home. And a few years later, I ran into her with her kids. She had birthed at home. It's like she heard it and it made sense to her. And so that's what I've never felt like, oh, I've got to go out and I've got to tell the world and I've got to convince the world. No, it's like, I will share my stories with whoever is interested. I was compelled to write a book, and I was compelled to put up a website. But to me, these stories are so powerful that women that's why it's spreading, because people are saying, that makes sense. And I want that. And I can create that. I don't want the trauma that I experienced in the hospital, which isn't always traumatic, but is for many women.
Wow. I love that. Oh my goodness. You actually normalize the idea of a breech birth, which is very, very very beautiful, because even listening to it now makes it seem like, well, if breech birth is not as uncommon as we think it is, maybe it is a still natural way of giving birth. It's just
Right.
different than what we expect.
To me, it's a variation. And I almost feel like I had my babies all these different ways so that I could say, well, been there, done that, first baby face presentation. Technically, you're not supposed to have the baby face first. It's supposed to be the back of the head. My baby came out face first, but he came out, my third baby posterior, facing my front, not my back. So, my last baby, cord wrapped around the neck, which happens about 25% of the time. Doesn't have to be a horrible thing. Blood and oxygen are still traveling through the cord. I unwound it as she was coming out. I lifted it off. So I'm not saying there are never complications, but there are so many of the things that people think are complications are really just variations.
Yes. Wow, that is deep. I have one last question.
Okay.
And so you were talking a lot about having sex before labor. So that kind of goes into the question of, you've also shared that birth is a sexual thing. So could you elaborate more on that?
Yeah. To me, birth is just the culmination of the sex act. It's like why people separate it. Every baby is the result of at least one orgasm, hopefully two. And why then do we say, oh, well, conception is sexual in most cases, but birth is not? To me, it's, yes, it's involving the same hormones, it's involving the same organs. And actually, if you're sexually stimulated, the vagina widens, and you begin to produce oxytocin, which is what you need. Some women are given pitocin, which is artificial oxytocin. But if you're sexually stimulated, if your nipples are stimulated, then you produce oxytocin, which helps get the baby out. There's also a hormone in semen that softens the cervix and widens the pelvic ligaments. So it makes sense that the semen would soften the cervix to allow for the for the sperm to penetrate. And it makes sense then if you have sex in labor, and some people, probably doctors would tell you don't have it after your water's broken, but I had it before my water was broken. I was feeling contractions, but then it can help soften the cervix to get the baby out. So really whatever will put you into a relaxed state of mind. So if you are a singer, sing. If you are a dancer, dance. If sex will help you relax, then have sex. And so yeah, it does produce those hormones that can put you into that relaxed state. Whatever will get you into that state, into the zone, as some artists call it or athletes call it. If it can get you into that zone, then your body can just sort of take over, and birth can be this beautiful, sensual experience rather than this painful, traumatic medical event.
Wow, I love that. And when you think of it in that way, it actually changes. I find that that also changes the way the contractions feel. Because if you
Right,
think of it as a sexual thing, the contractions start to feel more of like a sensual wave.
right, right.
Yeah.
Pain is very different than pain with fear. So if you feel some pain, but you're not afraid, it totally changes the experience. If you can eliminate the fear, you can learn to ride those waves. And some women do experience orgasms as babies are coming out. So there's a whole book and a film about it. And I've written about it on my website, orgasmic birth.
Wow. Awesome. So where can everyone find your book? And of course, we know your website is unassistedchildbirth.com. But where can everyone
Right.
find your book?
So my book, if you go to my website, you can click on it. It'll take you over to Amazon and you can buy it over there. I would recommend the third edition, which is a paperback. The other two were published by an academic press, and they're more expensive. I did have to buy the rights to my book so that I could publish a paperback, but I did that in 2016. and that has more birth stories in it. But so Unassisted Childbirth, third edition, either go to my website, unassistedchildbirth.com, or freebirth.com will get you there too, or go to Amazon, or there's other places, other online booksellers where you can get it too. And then I have a lot of stories on my website that can be really helpful for women, and a lot of articles. Go to YouTube, look at unassisted birth videos. That's really helpful.
Mhm.
And people can contact me through my website.
Awesome. Awesome. Yes. Okay. So that is great. Thank you so much for being on today. It was
Yeah,
nice
thank you.
you. I was really, really excited when you messaged me on Instagram because I was like, oh my God, I've actually saw this website before.
Good.
What are the odds of that?
Usually I wait for people to contact me, but I just read your story and I read, you seem so enthusiastic, and I was like, I'm going to contact her. So
Wow. I think it was meant to be because
yeah.
even when I listen to some of the things that you're saying, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's almost like souls can intertwine.
Right.
Yeah.
Life is magical. That's what we have to remember.
Yes. Okay, thank you. I'll definitely be keeping in touch with you.
Okay, great.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
If you are new to this channel, I want you to click that red juicy button down below. Down below, it says subscribe. It says subscribe because we are going to be having a bunch of new guests coming back soon.